He was a quiet boy from the Midwest, a child who preferred the calm hum of an airplane engine to the noise of crowded rooms. Neil Armstrong entered the world on August 5, 1930, in the small town of Wapakonta, Ohio. No one in the town could have imagined that the thin, serious kid they saw biking through the dusty streets would one day become the first human to step onto another world. Yet from his earliest days there were signs, small ones, almost invisible, that pointed toward the sky. His father, Stephen, worked for the state government and often traveled across Ohio for his job. Neil went with him sometimes, staring out the window, imagining invisible lines that connected every town, every field, every open space. At 6 years old, he sat in the cockpit of a Ford trimotor airplane for the very first time, and when the engines roared to life beneath him, something inside him clicked. A new world opened, one he would chase for the rest of his life. A boy doesn't always understand the destiny that waits for him, but the feeling he had in that seat stayed with him. As he grew, his passion intensified. He read about flight obsessively, borrowing every aviation book the local library had. He built model airplanes with a precision that impressed adults. And he didn't just build them, he studied them, learned from them, pushed them to their limits. By the time he reached high school, he was already taking flying lessons, paying for them with money earned cutting grass and doing odd jobs. His instructor remembered him as a calm, analytical student, never rattled, never impatient. At 16, before he even had a driver's license, Neil Armstrong earned his pilot's license. He could legally soar through the sky before he could legally drive a car on the ground. The world around him was entering a new era. America was recovering from the Great Depression and watching global tensions rise. Airplanes were no longer just machines. They were symbols of progress, of power, of the future. Neil entered college to study aeronautical engineering, a field that barely existed a generation before. He was quiet among his peers, not shy exactly, but reserved. He didn't boast about his skill or his experience. He simply observed, absorbed, and learned. Professors noticed that he understood concepts at an almost intuitive level. When others struggled with equations, he saw patterns. When others designed basic solutions, he developed elegant ones. Yet even with his talent, the world was about to pull him in a different direction. The Korean War erupted. Neil, like many young men of his generation, felt the call to serve. He became a Navy pilot, and the quiet Ohio boy was suddenly flying high-risk missions over enemy territory. These were not gentle flights in the open skies of Ohio. These were dives, rolls, combat maneuvers performed while tracer rounds lit up the dark. In one mission, his plane was hit. A wire snapped. The aircraft became uncontrollable. Armstrong fought with the controls, realized he couldn't save it, and ejected. He landed safely, but the experience stayed with him, a reminder of how thin the line is between life and death in the air. His commanders noticed something unusual about him. He didn't panic. He reacted with calm calculation, even with the world literally spinning around him. It was a trait that would define his career. After the war, he returned to college and completed his degree. But the skis called again, though this time in a different direction. The newly formed National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, NACA, the predecessor to NASA, was searching for exceptional pilots willing to fly experimental aircraft. These were the boundary pushers, the test pilots who would risk their lives for data, for knowledge, for breakthroughs. Armstrong joined them. At Edwards Air Force Base, he entered a world where danger was routine. The desert was littered with stories of pilots who had tried to push machines too far, too fast. Neil became part of an elite group determined to conquer those limits. He flew the X-15, a rocket-powered aircraft capable of reaching the edge of space. Each flight was a violent conversation between man and machine, the slightest miscalculation enough to send them both tumbling. Armstrong had moments where things went wrong, seriously wrong. In one flight, he bounced off the atmosphere like a stone skipping across water. The aircraft climbed higher than intended, leaving him too far downrange. He fought to regain control, gliding miles off course and landing safely only through intense focus and extraordinary skill. Engineers later reviewed the flight data and agreed that another pilot might not have survived. Armstrong rarely talked about it. He rarely talked about anything sensational. That was his nature. When NASA began selecting astronauts for the Gemini and Apollo programs, Armstrong was an obvious choice. Yet he didn't push for attention. He didn't lobby. He didn't advertise himself. His record spoke for him. In 1962, he officially joined NASA's astronaut corps. The Soviet Union had already shocked the world by launching Yuri Gagarin into space. America was behind, and President John F. Kennedy issued a bold challenge: land a man on the moon and return him safely before the decade ended. It was an impossible goal, or so it seemed. Behind the scenes, NASA was racing against time, battling technical failures, accidents, political pressure, and their own limits. Armstrong trained relentlessly. Simulators malfunctioned, rockets exploded, colleagues died. The Gemini 8 mission would test him in a way no one expected. After a successful docking with an unmanned spacecraft, the first in history, the combined vehicle began spinning uncontrollably. The stars outside the window became streaks of light as the rotation accelerated. Armstrong and astronaut Dave Scott struggled to regain control. They were seconds away from passing out. Armstrong cut loose from the docked spacecraft, then fired the re-entry thrusters, an extreme measure rarely used. The spin slowed. The spacecraft stabilized. Mission Control realized that his calm decision-making had saved both astronauts' lives. When they landed, Armstrong didn't describe himself as a hero. He simply said he'd done what needed to be done. That composure, that rare balance of intelligence and instinct, earned him the role that would define human history. He became the commander of Apollo 11, the mission intended to land humans on the moon for the first time. It was not guaranteed to succeed. The Saturn V rocket, though powerful, was still temperamental. The lunar module was fragile, almost delicate, and many believed there was a 50-50 chance the crew might never return. Armstrong knew the risks. So did Buzz Aldrin and Michael Collins. Yet on July 16, 1969, with millions watching, the Saturn V lifted off. The journey to the moon was a silent glide through darkness. The astronauts joked, observed, and worked through checklists. 3 men alone in a small spacecraft, traveling through a void no human had ever crossed in this way. When they reached lunar orbit, Armstrong and Aldrin entered the lunar module, Eagle, preparing for descent. The world held its breath. As they descended, alarms blared, computers overloaded. Armstrong ignored the noise, focusing on the landing site. He saw boulders, craters, hazards everywhere. He took manual control. Fuel levels dropped dangerously low. The silence in mission control was almost unbearable. Then, with seconds of fuel remaining, the Eagle touched down. "Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed." Cheers erupted around the planet, but the greatest moment was still ahead. When Armstrong stepped onto the lunar surface, he paused. Not for dramatic effect, but because he wanted to take in the moment. The strange, gray dust beneath him, the endless horizon, the earth hanging in the sky like a fragile blue marble. Then he spoke the words heard by millions. "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." He collected samples, photographed the surface, completed scientific tasks, but he also allowed himself a moment of reflection. Later, he said the moon felt like a quiet, peaceful place, almost serene. It didn't feel hostile. It felt ancient, patient, waiting for humanity to arrive. When the astronauts returned to Earth, they were heroes. Parades, ceremonies, interviews. Armstrong endured them, but fame was never his goal. He retired from NASA shortly after, choosing a quieter life as a professor of engineering. Students remembered him as humble, soft-spoken, surprisingly funny at times. He never used his fame for advantage. He lived simply, avoided the spotlight, and always gave credit to the thousands of people who made Apollo possible. In his later years, he spoke occasionally about space exploration. He remained a strong supporter of NASA, though he voiced concerns when he felt decisions were misguided. He believed deeply in human potential, in the value of pushing boundaries, in the importance of curiosity. When he died in 2012, the world mourned, not just a hero, but a symbol of what humanity can achieve when it dares to dream beyond the limits of the possible. His footprint remains on the moon, untouched by wind or rain, a quiet mark from a quiet man, a reminder that even the calmest voices can echo across history. And somewhere in Ohio, the old fields where a 6-year-old boy once looked up at the sky still exist, unchanged. Perhaps that child didn't know the journey ahead, but maybe, just maybe, he felt it. The pull of the sky, the call of the unknown, the first whisper of a destiny that would lead him farther than any human had ever gone. And that is the story of Neil Armstrong, a boy who loved airplanes, a pilot who faced danger with calm resolve, and a man whose footsteps carried all of humanity into a new era.